Hello, true believers. It's a little bit of an ironic statement given what this video is about. It's been a while since I've made a video. A lot of changes that have been happening. I mentioned in one of my previous ones that, and if you've been following my social media, I was podcasting. I'm taking a break from the podcast right now, or from podcasting in general. I'm going to grad school, and that's taking up a bit of my time and all of that, and working on my writing projects. So the YouTube channel has been very secondary. Put it on hiatus, maybe put up some videos periodically, but that's all beside the point. And I know I'm a little bit late in tribute videos like this, but it's partly because I've needed time to process and find the stuff I needed in order to make it and all of that. And I'm doing this completely off the cuff. It's not scripted, this is completely raw. The great Stanley Lieber, if you would prefer to call him that, has died. I had a friend this week who joked that he's surprised there weren't candlelight vigils being held outside every comic shop in America. And to be honest, after I heard him say that, I'm a little surprised myself. There are really no other people who have worked in the comic book industry who had the impact that Stan did. It goes without saying. And I'm sure all of you, whether you are a comic book reader, a comic book fan or not, have been hearing all about that this week. And it's difficult for me to bring all of that up because I don't know what to add to that. I mean, how else? Just the minimum, just telling people, this is the man who created the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Avengers, reintroduced Captain America, and made him who he is now. And it's just, the impact that he has is astounding. I mean, just this shirt that I'm wearing, I was thinking about this shirt that I'm wearing, I've worn it many times. I don't know if you can see the whole thing or not, but every character on this shirt, with the exception of 3, that being Nightcrawler, Wolverine, and technically Captain America, everybody on this shirt is one of Stan's characters. All of them. The sheer body of work that he's done, the characters he's created, the storytelling that he introduced to comics, getting away from the mythic designs of DC and taking a more naturalistic approach. I've heard it said that the big difference between DC and Marvel is that for DC, those are stories about gods trying to be human, whereas Marvel Comics, it's about humans trying to be gods. He brought a sensibility, many sensibilities to comics that nobody was doing. It was a revolutionary time in the 60s, what he was doing. The idea of making a 16-year-old boy, Spider-Man, and giving him real-life problems and making him less than perfect. All of these things. And touching on real issues like segregation and civil rights like he did with X-Men, but not in an in-your-face sort of a way, but taking those ideas and recontextualizing them in a way that made people think. It's just the sheer number of things that he did was astonishing. And then becoming the editor of Marvel, president of Marvel, and then even after he retired, becoming the face of Marvel. He was everywhere. Marvel kept him on payroll because he was such a consummate, hyperbolic showman. He was great publicity for them. He had this wonderful personality. He loved the fans. He loved people. And there was no better face that you could have for your company. Why do you think he was cameoing in almost every movie that Marvel has to its name. That's what a lot of people know him from now. He's the random old guy who shows up in all of these movies. And he always adds a wonderful sense of fun with those. And it was just little things. It was almost like Where's Waldo? You go to a Marvel movie, you'll look for Stan, see if you can spot him. And sometimes he would show up in Marvel movies that you wouldn't expect him to be in. He was in Deadpool. None of the characters in Deadpool, in the Deadpool movie, were his. Heck, even recently he was in Venom. None of those characters are his. But he was there because it's expected. Because people love him. He went from being this incredible creative powerhouse, creating an entire universe. Fantastic Four #1, the first comic he ever wrote, is considered the official birthplace of the Marvel Universe. Yeah, there were comics that they published before then under the name Timely, and those were grandfathered in, but Fantastic Four #1 is the official birthplace of the Marvel Universe. So without that, without Fantastic Four #1, without Stan, there would be no Marvel Universe. Deadpool and Venom and all the rest of those characters that technically he didn't create would have no place to hang out. And you could even make the argument that all of these superhero movies, Marvel Studios, all of these things, they wouldn't have existed without Stan. I've even heard some people say that Hollywood would be dead if not for superhero movies. Superhero movies are keeping them afloat. So you could make the argument that Hollywood itself owes its livelihood to Stan. That's why I say his legacy is undeniable. And it's far-reaching. I know people who've never read comics, but they love the Marvel movies. They're still enjoying the fruits of Stan's labor. There are a few things that don't get talked about as much that I really take away from Stan's life. And the first of which is Stan wasn't an overnight success. When all of us talk about him, when we see interviews with him and all that, we're used to, seeing the grandfather, this grandfatherly figure that came along later. Or we might see him from pictures or video of him from the 60s, 70s when he was pumping out the most of his writing work. Stan had started working at Marvel Comics when he was 18 years old. He was a child of the Depression. And he needed a job. He wanted to become a novelist. That was his ultimate goal. He took the job at Marvel because it was a job. And then he worked there, aside from a stint serving in the military in World War II. Thank you, Stan, for your service. Aside from that, he spent near over 20 years working for Marvel before he finally made it big. He was nearly 40 years old when he wrote Fantastic Four #1. When he got to write a comic the way he wanted to write it. And then look what happened after that. Almost till he was 40. And for a writer like me, an artist like me, that's encouraging. I know I may put on this very confident bravado and all of that, or I just don't really talk about it, but I haven't achieved the level of success that I've wanted to in my own career. And sometimes that depresses me. I feel like it's too late. And then I think about Stan, who spent a large chunk of his life working at a job he didn't necessarily enjoy, not getting to really do what he wanted to do, but working hard at it. When he got to write Fantastic Four, he was about ready to quit. And then his wife told him, well, write this comic how you want. What's the worst they can do, fire you? That story has become an encouragement for me. To know that through hard work and perseverance, even if it comes later in life, later than you wanted it to, you can still become successful. Now, I am in no way trying to say that I'm going to become the next Stanley. There can be no other Stanley. But if I could have just a fraction, and I really do mean a fraction because of just the sheer amount of success that came his way after that moment, after the publication of Fantastic Four #1. Just to have a fraction of that, I could die a happy man, a happy writer, a happy artist. That's why, so often in the last year, when I have felt that discouragement, I think about Stan. I had the privilege, a year and a half ago, checked an item off of my bucket list. I had an opportunity to meet him. It was at C2E2 over in Chicago. I had heard that he was, despite his seemingly boundless energy, he was most likely very soon going to stop making appearances at cons. And I knew he probably wasn't going to come to a show closer to me than this time. And I wasn't about to miss it. There were a lot of other guests there that I wish I could have met, but my entire day was spent on Stan, and I have no regrets about it. None whatsoever. I went to a panel that he had that morning with Frank Miller, who I do like, but I think went insane in the 90s, but that's a whole other story. And he shared a story in this panel that really surprised me. Because as always happens when he's being interviewed, someone asked him, tell us about creating Spider-Man. And I'm thinking, what are you doing? I've heard this story 1,000 times. I know the whole thing. And then I was surprised. Stan shared a part of the story that I hadn't heard before. And again, goes back to the kind of writer he was and the kind of person that his wife was. He told the story about meeting his wife, and it's a wonderful story too. Stan put together the script with Steve Ditko, who's the artist, for Amazing Fantasy number 15, first appearance of Spider-Man. He took it to, I can't remember if it was the editor, the publisher, whoever it was, gave the thing to him for approval. And the guy hated it. Hated it. For all the reasons that Stan believed in it. That it was a teenage kid, that he had real life problems, that he screwed up, made a huge mistake in it, and his uncle died because of it. All of these things. You know, the fact that he was called Spider-Man, and people don't want, and people said, you know, people are scared of Spider-Man. You know, all of these things. And he said no. Stan went home that night, vented to his wife, and she said, essentially, if you believe in it so much, why don't you just submit it anyway? So he did. And then ironically, he got called into this guy's office a month later, and after he slipped it to the printers under his nose, and the guy said, you know that story I told you, I talked to you about last time, and I didn't like it? Yeah. It was our best-selling comic the entire month. Can you do another one? Talk about vindication. I take great encouragement from that as well. Because I am also the kind of person who looks at what's being done and thinks, okay, that's interesting. I'll take a little bit of that, but I'm going to do something new with it. Something unexpected. Something different. And to take such a bold move in defiance of the guy who could easily fire you because you believe in something, you believe in the story that you're telling. That gives me so much hope as a writer because I think outside the box. I don't like being pigeonholed. I don't pay attention to trends. I would rather create trends, and that's exactly what Stan did. He was a trend maker. a trendsetter. Everyone who's been working at Marvel, or really just comics in general, their lives have been touched by what Stan did, and they have been following the path that he blazed for them. I mentioned his wife Joan, who died tragically last year, and I, myself and a lot of other fans were concerned that now that she was gone, Stan lost his anchor. And we say that because Stan was only ever married once. They were married for nearly 70 years. 70 years. This is another thing that doesn't get talked about a lot with Stan. 70 years. There are people nowadays where even if they do somehow get married, they'd be lucky if they could last 70 minutes. Stan went 70 years. You don't see marriages like that anymore. That level of love and commitment, I'm actually in some ways a little bit jealous. I wish I could see some stuff like that now. That for me is an encouragement. That sort of love is possible. That you can find something that's genuine and true and lasting. And Stan joked about it. There's only been a handful of times I've heard him talk about how he's managed to stay married as long as he has, and his joke was that he just let Joan win all of the arguments. It's a very Stanley way of putting it. And Stan said that whenever he was writing any of his heroines, Jean Grey, Black Widow, all of them, he was thinking of Joan. So she not only pushed him to do the things that he believed in with his writing, but she found a way, little pieces of her found their way into Stan's work. There are a handful of writers who've had tremendous impacts on my life, if you know me at all. Writers like J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis have had a tremendous impact on my thinking, as well as my writing. Stan, as I think I've illustrated, has had a huge impact on my life because of how much his work has pervaded my life. I don't remember when I first found out about Stan. It might have been thanks to the 90s Spider-Man cartoon series, because, spoiler warning, he has a cameo in that, in the final episode. Might have been that, but I knew it was sometime when I was in high school. And then the older I got, the more I learned about him, the more he started to pervade my life. But I was aware of his works, his creations, his characters, before I even knew who he was. I knew about the X-Men and Spider-Man before I heard his name. And it's to the point now where I've kind of become... There are several fandoms that get closely associated with me as a nerd. One of them is superheroes. And I've been surprised that only a few people have wanted to talk to me about Stan's passing. A lot of people have also been talking about this week about his cameos in the movies. Which ones were the best and all of that. And I have to admit that there have been a couple in particular that have really been sticking with me. They stuck with me before, but they've really been sticking with me this week. The first one, and this one actually ended up elevated, weirdly enough, is his cameo in Spider-Man 3, believe it or not.
You know, I guess one person can make a difference. Enough said.
Whenever I saw this, I watched a lot of videos on YouTube this week about Stan, and whenever they would show this clip, I would get weirdly emotional about it. It's a wonderful message for him to communicate, because I think Stan lived that, and I think his characters do the same thing as well. And the other one that I wanted to mention was, and this really is my favorite of his cameos, would be Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2.
Anyway, before I was so rudely interrupted, at that time, I was a Federal Express man.
Hey, fellas. Hey, wait, where are you going? Hey, you were supposed to be my lift home. How will I get out of here? Hey, gee, I've got so many more stories to tell. Guys. Oh, gee.
But what I love about that one is, well, two things. One is it plays into this theory that fans had for a long time that Stan is playing the same character in all of his cameos. It's the same person. Some even thought he was a Watcher. So this scene didn't confirm that he's a Watcher. He's not a Watcher, but he's an agent of the Watcher. And what is he doing? He's collecting stories and then telling them. He's watching all of the heroes in the MCU and possibly even the other movie universes, because the Sony Spider-Man stuff is separate from the MCU, and the Fox X-Men stuff is separate from the MCU. So he might even be possibly bouncing around the entire multiverse, watching all of these heroes and collecting their stories and chronicles, and is now sharing them with the Watchers so they can keep a record of it. It is quite possibly the most perfect thing for Stan to be, because he is a storyteller. Not only that, a collector of stories. I mean, just look at this. Look at this. I'm a collector of stories too. Yeah, all of you, you see my background. I always stand in front of my bookshelf where you can see my movies. I have another shelf that's nothing but my actual books. I have multiple long boxes of comics. I'm a collector of stories too. And as you can see, you don't have to look too hard, but you see Stan in here. Avengers, Daredevil, Elektra. Well, Elektra's not his, but Fantastic Four. And then here you got all the MCU movies that I have currently. He's in all of those. Spider-Man films over here. I'm the same way. You look at any of my shelves, you're going to see Stan on it. I want to end with this. I mentioned that I got to meet him, and it took me the entire day, and I might add a hefty sum of money to get everything I wanted that day. And one of those was I got to have a photo op with him. I don't know how well you can see this, and I'm filming this by myself, so I don't know how good this looks, but I got to meet him twice. This was the second time. Myself and my friend Sergio, who you've seen on some of my videos. This was easily one of the greatest moments for myself as a fan. I got to shake his hand, when I'm guessing he probably wasn't supposed to be shaking people's hands. I will cherish this photograph. And then the other one is the first time I got to see him. I had to stand in line for several hours so I could get his autograph. That was the first time I got to meet him that day. It wasn't for very long. And interestingly, I was wearing my Captain America cosplay. And sometimes I think back on it and I wish I had something else I could have had him sign. And an actual vintage copy of one of his comics from the 60s, perhaps. I certainly didn't have anything as important and valuable like Amazing Fantasy 15, Fantastic Four #1, Incredible Hulk #1, X-Men #1, or anything like that. But I did the best I could with what I had. I am proud to say well, you can see it. This is a graphic novel collection of many of his early issues for Captain America, when Captain America was given his own solo series after being reintroduced to the Marvel Universe in Avengers #4. It's his signature. I'm sure this book isn't worth a whole lot. I had wondered if it could have been made more valuable by the fact that his signature was on it, and now I wonder if it's become even more valuable now that he's passed. I really wanted to, and I got a certificate of authenticity and everything for this. I'm going to cherish this as well. I may not even read it ever again because I want to make sure that I'm able to preserve this. Like I said, Stan didn't create Cap, but he brought Cap back. When he could have easily have been lost in the annals of comic book history. He made Captain America relevant again. A character who was created right before, during World War II, even before the U.S. was involved in the war, and served a great purpose then, but then became irrelevant. He made Cap who he is now. There's not much else to say at this point, though there is a lot I could say. But this video has gone on long enough. So I'll just end it by saying, thank you, Stan. Thank you, Stan, for being the writer, the showman, and the grandfather that we all love. Excelsior.